I was 67 years old when my entire world shattered with one text message. "Get out now, don't tell them anything. The police are coming." As I stood in my daughter's kitchen, surrounded by family who were laughing and eating as if everything was normal, I felt my blood run cold. Because in my garage, hidden from everyone, was a little boy with my dead son's eyes, a grandson my own family had denied and tried to erase. What would you do if you discovered your most trusted family members were capable of unspeakable betrayal? For months, I'd been hiding a child in my garage, protecting him from the people who should have loved him most. When I received that mysterious warning and chose to flee into the night with him, I had no idea I was about to uncover a conspiracy that would reveal the darkest secrets of those I thought I knew. Sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones sitting across from you at the dinner table. If you want to discover the shocking truths behind my family's betrayal and see how far a grandmother will go to protect her grandson, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from. Trust me, what happens next will leave you speechless. I was 67 years old when I served the last slice of apple pie that cold Saturday afternoon in Appleton, Wisconsin. The house was full. My children were talking loudly. The smell of roast beef filled the kitchen, and my youngest granddaughter was laughing on the rug with the dog. My daughter-in-law was complaining about the salt as usual. I kept quiet, washing dishes with trembling hands that nobody noticed. The party was in honor of my daughter, but there was something in the air I couldn't name, an invisible absence, a suffocating presence. That's when my cell phone vibrated. I slid my finger across the screen and read, "Get out now. Don't tell them anything. The police are coming." The world stopped. I no longer felt the cold or heard my granddaughter's laughter. I stared at the screen for seconds that seemed like an eternity. The number was unknown. I got up without saying a word, took off my apron, grabbed my coat from the back of the chair, and walked through the living room like a shadow. My daughter called out to me, "Mom, where are you going?" I only replied, "I forgot something in the yard." I went out through the back door and didn't look back. My feet sank into the thin snow on the lawn, and as the wind cut through my skin, I heard, again, that soft crying coming from the garage, like a hidden sob, muffled, familiar. The door was ajar. Nobody knows this, but for months I had been hiding a boy in that garage. A boy nobody in the family wanted. A boy with my dead son's eyes. And if I hadn't read that message, if I hadn't obeyed, I would have been arrested that night. Arrested for something they did themselves. But this is just the beginning. You see, I never planned to become the family secret keeper. I was supposed to be enjoying my retirement, baking pies, and watching my grandchildren grow up. Instead, I found myself sneaking food to a garage in the middle of winter nights, whispering bedtime stories to a child who barely spoke, and lying to the faces I once trusted most in this world. It all started 2 years ago, when my son Michael died in that horrible truck accident on Route 41. He was always the rebellious one, never settled down the way his sister did, never gave me grandchildren the proper way with a nice church wedding and a white picket fence. At least that's what everyone thought, until she showed up at the funeral. Her name was Lucia, pretty young thing with dark curls and tired eyes. She stood at the back of the church, clutching a bundle in her arms that I couldn't quite see. My daughter Jessica noticed her first and whispered something to her husband. My son-in-law Richard, always so proper with his insurance job and his country club membership, immediately straightened his tie and walked over, blocking her from approaching the casket. I remember how the church fell silent, how people turned to stare, and how Jessica grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin, hissing, "Don't you dare go over there, Mom. That's just some gold digger trying to get a piece of Michael's insurance money." But there was something in Lucia's eyes, a desperation I recognized. And when Richard tried to escort her out, the bundle in her arms shifted and I saw him for the first time. A tiny face with Michael's chin, Michael's eyebrows, Michael's everything. I knew instantly. A grandmother knows. By the time I reached them, Richard had already called security. Lucia was sobbing, trying to explain that Michael had promised to tell everyone about them, about the baby. But he was waiting for the right time. He loved us, she kept saying. He was coming home to us that night. My family closed ranks immediately. Jessica, always the practical one, said we couldn't trust this woman who conveniently appeared after Michael's death. My nephew Thomas, the accountant, pointed out there was no DNA test, no proof. And my niece Rachel, the family lawyer, already had the restraining order paperwork ready by the next morning. But I couldn't forget those eyes that looked exactly like my Michael's. So I started meeting Lucia in secret. At first, just for coffee at a diner 2 towns over. Then at her tiny apartment where little Jeremy was learning to crawl. I'd bring toys, clothes, formula, things I'd pretend were donations for church. Lucia would cry sometimes, telling me how Michael had promised they'd be a family, how they were saving for a little house in Milwaukee, far from my family's judgment. Then one day, I arrived at her apartment and found the door ajar. The place was empty. No Lucia, no baby things, just a single teddy bear on the floor and a note on the kitchen counter that still haunts me. They found us. I have to run. Please keep him safe. They'll hurt him to keep their secret. And there he was, asleep in the closet. Jeremy, 9 months old and already carrying the weight of secrets too heavy for his tiny shoulders. I didn't know what Lucia meant by their secret. I didn't know who they were, but the fear in those words was real. And before I could think straight, I had bundled Jeremy into my car and driven home, heart pounding with each mile. That night, I made the garage into a little hideaway. Heater running, old playpen from the attic, toys I claimed were for a church donation. And every day for months, I lived 2 lives. Doting mother and grandmother inside the house, desperate protector in the garage. Only Mildred knew. Sweet old Mildred next door, who'd lost her own grandson years ago. She'd help me sneak supplies, keep watch when family visited, and remind me that what I was doing might be illegal, but wasn't wrong. Blood knows blood, she'd say, adjusting her thick glasses. And secrets have a way of crawling into the light. If only I'd known how right she was. If only I'd realized sooner that the text message that cold Saturday wasn't a warning. It was the beginning of a war. The garage was cold and damp, with the smell of burnt oil mixed with mildew making me nauseous. But there, behind my grandson's old bicycle, was him, little Jeremy, huddled under the patchwork quilt I'd secretly sewn, with red eyes and a runny nose. He didn't speak. He just looked at me, the same look as his father, my son, who died in a truck accident years before. Jeremy was his son with a woman my family never accepted. My heart pounded against my ribs as I knelt beside him, my arthritic knees protesting against the concrete floor. His tiny hand reached for mine, and I noticed how chapped his skin had become in the winter cold, despite the small space heater I'd hidden behind boxes of Christmas decorations. No child should have to live this way, in shadows and whispers, like a shameful secret. "It's okay, sweetheart," I whispered, brushing his dark curls away from his forehead. He felt warm, too warm. The fever that had started 3 days ago wasn't breaking, and I'd been sneaking children's Tylenol from my medicine cabinet, measuring careful doses with trembling hands. "Grandma's here now." Jeremy didn't answer. He rarely did. At 3 years old, he should have been chattering away like my other grandchildren had at his age. But trauma does things to little ones. Losing his mother, being hidden away, only seeing one old woman and occasionally Mildred, it had sealed his voice inside him like a bird in a box. My daughter-in-law always said that woman, Lucia, only wanted the family's money. Gold digger, she'd mutter whenever I'd mention Michael's girlfriends. "You're too trusting, Helen." But she never met Lucia, never saw how she looked at my son like he'd hung the moon, never saw the crayon drawings of mommy, daddy, and baby that Lucia kept taped to her refrigerator door in that tiny apartment. When my son died, she appeared at the funeral with the baby in her arms and tears in her eyes. She begged me for help. But my daughter, my son-in-law, and even my niece Rachel the lawyer, they all said it was a scam, that he wasn't family. But I knew. One look was all it took. Jeremy had Michael's eyes, those distinctive hazel eyes with flecks of gold that skipped a generation from my father. He had the same cowlick at the crown of his head, the same dimple in his left cheek. Blood called to blood. I might be old, but I'm not blind. And when Lucia disappeared mysteriously, leaving only a hastily scrawled note warning of danger, I did what nobody else had the courage to do. I hid him. I remember that day so clearly, finding her apartment door unlocked, baby Jeremy asleep in his crib, but no Lucia anywhere. Just that note on the counter. They know. They're coming. Please keep him safe. I'll come back when I can. I never heard from her again. I called hospitals, police stations, even morgues, using a different name each time. Nothing. It was like she'd vanished into thin air. At the time, my only ally was old Mildred from next door. 82 years old with arthritis worse than mine, but sharp as a tack, and with a heart big enough to hold all the neighborhood's secrets. She helped me care for him, brought food, and kept saying, "Don't trust your own house. Helen, there are people in there with rotten hearts." And she was right. The day after I took Jeremy, I overheard my daughter Jessica on the phone with Rachel. "It would ruin everything if that woman proved paternity. The trust fund would be split. And you know what that means for the lake house renovations." That's when I realized why they were so determined to keep Jeremy away. My son's estate, the insurance money, the trust fund my late husband had set up for the grandchildren. If Jeremy was recognized as Michael's son, the precious inheritance would be divided one more way, and my precious family couldn't bear the thought of sharing. So I built a little world for him in that garage, a play area behind the garden tools, books stacked in milk crates, a small mattress with flannel sheets I'd change every other day, a potty behind a makeshift screen, toys I'd buy from thrift stores 2 towns over, paying cash so there'd be no record. I became a smuggler of childhood, stealing moments of normalcy for a boy who didn't understand why he couldn't play in the sunshine. Now, as police sirens wailed in the distance, I had to decide quickly. The text message warning burned in my mind. Get out now. Don't tell them anything. The police are coming. Who sent it? Who knew about Jeremy besides Mildred? And who had called the police? Jeremy's tiny fingers clutched my sleeve, his eyes wide with fear at the sound of the sirens. He might not speak, but he understood danger. Children who grow up in shadows develop a 6th sense for threats. "We have to go, sweetheart," I whispered, wrapping him tighter in the quilt. "We're going to Miss Mildred's house for a little while." I gathered his medicine, a change of clothes, and the worn teddy bear that was his most prized possession. As I lifted him into my arms, feeling how light he still was for a 3-year-old, he buried his face in my neck. His little body was shaking. "It's okay to be scared," I told him, feeling my own fear like ice in my veins. "Grandma's scared too, but we're going to be brave together." The police weren't just coming for a lost child. They were coming for me, a 67-year-old woman who had chosen love over law, family over propriety. And if they found us, they'd take him away, put him in the system, or worse, hand him to the very people who had denied his existence. I couldn't let that happen. Not now. Not after everything. With Jeremy in my arms, I slipped out the side door of the garage into the gathering twilight. The snow had started again, soft flakes melting against our warm skin. Behind us, my family continued their dinner, laughing, arguing, completely unaware that their carefully constructed world was about to shatter. But now, the police were coming, and I needed to find out why, before it was too late. I returned to the house through the side entrance, where the motion sensor light had been broken for months. Another repair job my son-in-law Richard had promised to fix, but never did. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird as I slipped through the mudroom, praying nobody would spot me. The family voices still echoed from the dining room. My daughter Jessica's laugh, high and false. My grandson Tommy arguing about some video game. Richard holding court about property taxes. None of them noticed the old woman with terror in her eyes stealing through her own home. My weathered hands trembled as I grabbed my purse from the hook by the door, fumbling for my keys, my wallet, the emergency cash I'd been hiding in the lining, $20 here, $50 there, saved from grocery money and my modest pension. For moments like this, though I'd never actually believed this day would come. The weight of what I was doing crashed over me as I reached for my blood pressure medication on the kitchen counter. I was about to become a fugitive at 67, a kidnapper in the eyes of the law, a crazy old lady who had stolen a child. "Mom, what are you doing?" Jessica's voice froze me in place. She stood in the doorway between the kitchen and dining room, wine glass in hand, her perfect blonde highlights framing a face growing suspicious by the second. Behind her, I could see Richard glancing over, his businessman's eyes always calculating, always assessing threats. "Just getting my medicine, dear." My voice sounded strange even to me, too high, too brittle. "My head is pounding something fierce. I think I'll lie down for a bit." Jessica stepped closer, her expensive perfume washing over me. "You look flushed, and you're all bundled up." Her eyes narrowed, flicking to my purse, to the keys clutched in my hand. "Are you going somewhere?" I thought I might need to run to the pharmacy if my migraine gets worse. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. I'd never been good at deception before all this started. Now it seemed like second nature. "I can drive you," Richard offered, appearing behind Jessica like a shadow. Always the helpful son-in-law, always watching. "You shouldn't be driving with a migraine, Helen." "No," I said too quickly, then forced a smile. "No, thank you. I'm fine for now. I just need to rest." I backed away, clutching my purse to my chest, feeling the weight of their stares. Did they know? Had they called the police themselves? Was this all some elaborate trap? My phone buzzed again in my pocket. I didn't dare check it until I'd escaped to the guest bedroom. My bedroom now, since I'd moved in after Henry died 3 years ago. Another text from the same unknown number. "They know about the garage. Get the boy and run. 15 minutes. The room spun around me. They knew. Whoever they were, they knew about Jeremy, and they'd called the police. I glanced out the window and saw Mildred's porch light blinking, our signal that the coast was clear. Jeremy would be safe with her for now, but not for long. Not if the police were really coming. I grabbed the emergency bag I'd packed months ago and kept hidden in the back of my closet. A change of clothes, toiletries, Jeremy's birth certificate that Lucia had given me, and most importantly, Michael's journal. The journal nobody knew about. The journal he'd given me 2 days before the accident, with a strange urgency in his eyes. "Keep this safe, Mom," he'd said. "If anything ever happens to me, you'll know what to do." I hadn't understood then. I'd tucked it away, forgotten about it until Lucia showed up at the funeral with Jeremy. Then I'd read it, every heartbreaking page. Michael's love for Lucia, his plans to leave the family business and start over, his suspicions about Rachel and the company finances, his fear that something wasn't right. Now that journal might be the only proof that Jeremy belonged with me, with us, the only weapon I had against whatever storm was coming. I slipped out through the back door while the family was busy arguing about dessert. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were fighting over pie while I was fighting for a child's future. The ice-covered sidewalk threatened to send me sprawling with each step. February in Wisconsin doesn't forgive the careless, especially not old women with bad knees and worse timing. But fear is a powerful fuel. I made it to the corner, then ducked behind the Hendersons' fence before cutting across to Mildred's backyard. I dialed her number with fingers so cold they could barely press the buttons. She answered on the first ring, her voice trembling. "Helen, you got out?" "I'm almost there," I whispered, breath fogging in the frigid air. "Is he okay?" "He's fine. Scared, but fine. But Helen," her voice dropped even lower, "you were right. They called the police. I overheard on my scanner. They're saying you're unstable, that you've been keeping a child in dangerous conditions. They're saying you kidnapped him." The world tilted beneath my feet. I had to lean against a tree trunk to keep from falling. "Who?" I managed to ask. "Who reported it?" I couldn't tell. "But Helen, they're on their way. 3 minutes, maybe less." I could hear sirens in the distance now, wailing like hungry ghosts in the winter night, closing in. "Get Jeremy ready," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "We need to go. Now." I reached Mildred's back door, just as headlights swept down my street. Blue and red lights pulsed against the snow-covered yards. painting everything in the colors of emergency, of endings. Mildred stood waiting, Jeremy bundled in his coat and hat, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. She pressed a set of keys into my palm. "My sister's place in Green Bay," she said. "Nobody knows about it. The address is in the glove compartment. My old Buick's in the garage. Nobody will look for it. Go through the alley." Tears burned in my eyes as I took Jeremy's small hand in mine. "Mildred, I can't ask you to—" "You didn't ask." Her weathered face crinkled into a fierce smile. "Now go. I'll tell them I haven't seen you in days." As I settled Jeremy into the back seat of Mildred's ancient Buick, I heard the police knocking on my front door. I saw Richard answering, his face a perfect mask of concern. I saw Jessica dabbing at non-existent tears, and I knew who had betrayed us. As we drove away into the gathering darkness, Jeremy finally spoke, his voice small and rusty from disuse. "Gamma?" "Scared." I reached back and squeezed his knee. "I know, sweetheart, but we're going to be okay. Grandma's going to fix everything." But as the lights of Appleton faded behind us, as the snow began to fall harder, as the gas gauge dipped toward empty, I wondered if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life, or if I was finally doing something right. Either way, there was no turning back now. I had become what I never imagined. A 70-year-old fugitive with a traumatized child, running from the people I once called family, all because of a text message. All because I chose to believe in the eyes of a little boy who looked just like my son. Mildred had an old tape recorder hidden in her basement. She taught me how to use it when I told her I wanted to record Jeremy's crying, not to expose him, but to protect him, as evidence. The tape was still there. We played it together, and the sound of that sincere, desperate cry echoed through the room. But then, a surprise. Without meaning to, I had recorded a conversation between my daughter and my niece Rachel weeks before, on the other side of the garage. They didn't know they were being heard. The drive to Green Bay felt eternal, like crossing some biblical desert in the dead of night. The old Buick's heater worked overtime against the Wisconsin February, blasting hot air that smelled faintly of mothballs and Mildred's lavender perfume. Jeremy had fallen asleep in the back seat, his little body finally surrendering to exhaustion, his cheeks still flushed with fever. Every few minutes, I'd glance in the rearview mirror, reassuring myself he was still there, still breathing, still safe. For now, the highway stretched before us, an endless black ribbon dotted with the occasional headlights of passing trucks. Each set made my heart leap into my throat. Was it the police? Had they put out an alert? Was I already on the news? Another crazy grandmother, another sad headline. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, trying to focus on the road and not on the crushing weight of fear pressing against my chest. The snow was coming down harder now, fat flakes dancing in the headlights, hypnotic and disorienting. I hadn't driven in snow at night for years. Henry had always handled that, until the stroke took him from me. Now it was just me, just us. My mind kept circling back to that awful moment in Mildred's living room, just before we fled. The moment when she pulled out that ancient tape recorder from a box under her couch. "I've been meaning to give you this," she'd said, her arthritic fingers fumbling with the device. "I found it when I was cleaning out the basement last month. Thought you might want it." I'd recognized it immediately. The old Sony recorder Henry had used to tape family gatherings back in the 80s. We'd record the children opening Christmas presents, summer barbecues, birthday parties, happy times, preserved in magnetic tape, now faded like old photographs. "Why would I?" I'd started to ask, but Mildred's rheumy eyes had held a glint of mischief. "Remember when you asked to borrow it? To record Jeremy's crying as evidence? In case you ever needed to prove he existed?" I'd nodded slowly. It had been a desperate idea, back when I first started hiding him. A way to document his existence, to have some proof that I wasn't just a senile old woman inventing a grandchild. "Well," Mildred had continued, lowering her voice, though there was no one else to hear, "I found it in the garage when I was helping you move those boxes last month." The tape was still in it, My breath had caught. Did you? I listened to it. She'd pressed the device into my hands. Helen, you need to hear this. Now. With trembling fingers, I'd pressed play, and Jeremy's pitiful cries had filled the room, the sound of a frightened child trying to be brave. My heart had contracted painfully at the sound. But then, after a few minutes of crying, silence, and then voices. My daughter Jessica's voice, low and urgent. She can't keep hiding him in there forever. Someone's going to notice. And then Rachel's voice, my niece, the lawyer, always so polished, so professional. She won't have to. Another winter in that garage will either kill the kid or break her. She's not as strong as she thinks she is. But what if she tries to make it official? What if she goes to court? A laugh, cold as the snow outside. And say what? That she's been keeping an undocumented child in her garage for months? That she has no proof of guardianship? That she took him without reporting the mother's disappearance? She'd be in jail before she finished her statement. I don't know, Rachel. This feels wrong. Wrong? Rachel's voice had hardened. You know what's wrong? That woman showing up out of nowhere with some kid she claims is Michael's. No DNA test, no marriage certificate, nothing. Just sad eyes and a sob story. If we acknowledge that kid, the trust splits 3 ways instead of 2. Your renovations, Tommy's college fund, gone. Is that what you want? A long silence. Then Jessica's voice, softer. No. But Mom, your mother is lonely and confused. She's been different since your father died. Making up stories, getting too attached to strangers. Remember that delivery boy she kept inviting for dinner? She needs help, Jessica. Professional help. So what do? We wait. She'll slip up eventually. Old people always do. And when she does, we'll be there to pick up the pieces, to take care of her the way she needs to be taken care of. The tape had hissed into silence then, but the damage was done. In the car now, miles from Appleton, the memory of those voices made me grip the steering wheel even tighter. They had been planning this all along, waiting for me to make a mistake, watching me struggle with Jeremy, knowing I was hiding him, knowing I was terrified. My own daughter, my own flesh and blood. A sob caught in my throat, threatening to choke me. I forced it down. I couldn't afford to fall apart. Not now. Not with Jeremy depending on me. The exit for Green Bay appeared out of the swirling snow, and I took it gratefully, following Mildred's hastily scrawled directions to her sister's place, a small bungalow on the city's east side near the bay. It was almost midnight when I pulled into the driveway, killing the headlights quickly, paranoia making me check and double-check that no neighbors were watching. The key Mildred had given me worked, thank God. I carried Jeremy inside, his small body warm and heavy against my chest, his breath tickling my neck. The house was cold and smelled musty, like a place long uninhabited, but it was clean and furnished, a sanctuary in the storm. I laid Jeremy on the couch and covered him with my coat, then quickly explored the small house. 2 bedrooms, a bathroom with rust stains in the tub, a kitchen with an ancient refrigerator that hummed ominously. No phone. Mildred's sister must have disconnected it when she moved to Florida 3 years ago. But there was electricity, running water, and a pantry stocked with canned goods. Mildred's doing, no doubt. Bless that woman and her forward thinking. As I rummaged through the pantry, looking for something to feed Jeremy when he woke, my hand brushed against something hard tucked behind the cans of soup. Michael's journal. I'd almost forgotten I'd stuffed it in my purse before fleeing. I pulled it out, running my fingers over the worn leather cover. My son's thoughts, his hopes, his fears, all preserved in these pages. I'd read parts of it before, but never the whole thing. Never with the desperate attention I gave it now, sitting at the kitchen table with a single lamp burning low, while my grandson slept and the snow piled up outside. What I found inside those pages would change everything, if I could prove it was true. Green Bay was gray, damp, and cold. I hid in a small shelter for elderly women with a poetic name, Willow Haven. There I was, just another lonely old lady with tired eyes and hands marked by a story nobody wanted to hear. The first morning in Mildred's sister's house dawned gray and unforgiving. I hadn't slept. Not really. I dozed fitfully in the armchair next to the couch where Jeremy slept, startling awake at every creak of the old house settling, every distant siren, every whisper of wind against the windows. My bones ached from the awkward position, but I couldn't bring myself to leave him alone, even to use the second bedroom down the hall. Jeremy's fever had broken sometime in the night. His forehead felt cool under my palm as I checked him in the weak morning light, filtering through dusty curtains. Small mercies. I hadn't dared to turn on too many lights or the television, paranoid that somehow the glow would give us away to whom? The police? My family? I wasn't even sure anymore who the enemy was. The kitchen calendar hanging on a nail by the refrigerator read February 2019, a relic from when Mildred's sister had lived here. 3 years out of date. It felt fitting somehow, like we'd stepped backward in time, into a place where the present couldn't touch us. I made instant coffee with water heated in a saucepan. The microwave didn't work, and rummaged through the pantry for something Jeremy might eat. Canned peaches, crackers, a jar of peanut butter that thankfully hadn't expired. Not ideal, but it would have to do until I dared venture out for supplies. Jeremy woke as I was arranging his makeshift breakfast on a chipped plate. Gamma? His voice was small, uncertain. He sat up on the couch, hair tousled from sleep, eyes wide as he took in the unfamiliar surroundings. Where? My heart squeezed at the sound of his voice. He spoke so rarely that each word felt like a precious gift. We're at a friend's house, sweetheart. A safe place. He nodded solemnly, accepting this explanation with the simple trust of childhood. I wondered how much he understood of what was happening. Had he sensed the urgency of our flight? Did he remember the sirens, the hasty goodbye to Mildred, the long drive through the snow? Did he understand we might never go back? I couldn't bear to think about it too deeply. Instead, I focused on the practical, getting food into him, finding clean clothes in the small bag I'd packed, checking his temperature every hour just to be sure the fever wasn't coming back. By mid-morning, restlessness had set in. The house felt like a cage, albeit a safer one than we'd left behind. I peered cautiously through the curtains. The neighborhood seemed quiet. Modest homes with snow-covered lawns, cars parked in driveways, no sign of police or suspicious vehicles. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being hunted. Michael's journal lay open on the kitchen table where I'd left it the night before, certain passages underlined with my trembling hand, the words that had kept me awake, turning over and over in my mind like stones in a tumbler. Rachel says there's a way to restructure the trust fund, but it feels wrong. Dad wanted the money to go to his grandchildren equally. I tried telling her Jeremy counts, but she says without a formal acknowledgement, he's nobody. Her exact words, nobody, my son, I can't let this happen. And later, meeting with a lawyer tomorrow, not Rachel, someone independent. Need to update my will. Make sure Lucia and Jeremy are protected. Rachel's going to be furious when she finds out, but I don't care anymore. Family is what matters, not money. The entry was dated 3 days before his accident. 3 days before a truck supposedly lost control on a clear day on a straight stretch of highway. 3 days before my son was taken from us. Coincidence? I wanted to believe so, but the cold knot of suspicion in my stomach wouldn't let me. A knock at the door nearly stopped my heart. Jeremy, playing quietly with a wooden spoon and an empty pot on the living room floor, looked up sharply. I pressed a finger to my lips, the universal signal for silence. He nodded, eyes wide, and scooted behind the couch, a hiding place he found by instinct, breaking my heart all over again. The knock came again, more insistent this time. I crept to the window, careful to stay to the side of the curtain. An older woman stood on the porch, tall, silver-haired, dressed in a worn parka and sensible boots. Not police, not family, but still a stranger. I didn't move, didn't breathe, waited for her to give up and go away. Instead, she called out, "Mrs. Wilson, it's Melissa. Mildred's friend. She asked me to check on you." I hesitated. Could it be a trick? But how would anyone know to use Mildred's name? I hadn't told anyone where we were going. Not even Mildred knew the exact address, just that her sister had a place in Green Bay. The woman, Melissa pressed something against the window, a folded piece of paper. I edged closer, straining to see. It was a note in Mildred's distinctive, shaky handwriting. "Trust Melissa. She helped Michael once. She can help you now." My breath caught. Michael? This woman knew my son. With trembling hands, I unlocked the door, opening it just a crack, the security chain still in place. "How did you find us?" Melissa's face was lined but kind, her eyes a sharp blue that missed nothing. "Mildred called me. Said you might need help. I've been checking all her sister's properties since dawn." She glanced over her shoulder, then lowered her voice. "Can I come in? It's not safe to talk out here." Against every instinct for caution, I let her in. Something in her steady gaze reminded me of my late husband. Solid, trustworthy. Or perhaps I was simply desperate for an ally. Melissa stepped inside, stamping snow from her boots. Her eyes immediately found Jeremy peering out from behind the couch. She didn't approach him, didn't make a fuss, just nodded as if confirming something to herself. "He has Michael's eyes," she said softly. I'd recognize them anywhere. I stared at her, a wild hope blooming in my chest. "You knew my son." She nodded, unwinding her scarf. "I was a police officer in Appleton for 30 years before I retired. Your son saved my life." She paused, glancing around the sparse living room. "But that's a story for after you've had some real food and this little one has had a proper nap somewhere warmer than this icebox. Pack your things, Mrs. Wilson. You're coming with me." "Where?" I asked, even as I began gathering our meager belongings, somehow trusting this stranger implicitly. "Willow Haven," she replied. "It's a shelter for women over 60. I volunteer there 3 days a week. Nobody will look for you there. Who searches for a fugitive grandmother in a senior ladies' home?" A ghost of a smile crossed her weathered face. "And we've got heat, hot food, and no nosy neighbors with police scanners." As I bundled Jeremy into his coat, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. A fragile, tentative hope, but hope nonetheless. "Melissa," I said, gathering my courage, "there's something you need to see." I pointed to Michael's journal on the table. I think my son's death wasn't an accident. And I think his son, my grandson, is in danger because of what's in those pages." Melissa's expression hardened, the cop in her emerging through the grandmother exterior. "Then we have work to do, don't we?" That afternoon, as Jeremy napped in a warm bed at Willow Haven, and I sat across from Melissa in the shelter's quiet kitchen, I realized I'd found more than a refuge. I'd found an ally, someone who believed me, someone who might help me uncover the truth, whatever it might be. For the first time since reading that text message at the family dinner, I allowed myself to believe that we might actually survive this, that Jeremy might have a future, that justice might still be possible. I just didn't realize how high the cost would be. With Melissa's help, we went to one of her old contacts in the Justice Department. She believed that Rachel, my niece, was part of a larger scheme of inheritance fraud involving seniors in the region, and that I was just one among many. Willow Haven wasn't what I expected. From the outside, it looked like any other Victorian-era home in Green Bay's historic district. 3 stories of faded charm with gingerbread trim and a wide front porch. Inside, though, it hummed with quiet purpose. A dozen or so women, all over 60, some well into their 80s, moved through the common spaces with the comfortable familiarity of longtime roommates. No one asked why I was there. No one questioned Jeremy's presence. They simply made space for us at the dinner table, offered extra blankets, showed me where the laundry machines were located in the basement. It was as if they understood, perhaps from their own experiences, that some stories are too painful, too complicated to explain to strangers. Melissa had a small apartment on the 3rd floor, under the eaves. She gave us her spare bedroom, a tight fit with its narrow twin bed, but Jeremy and I managed, curled together like quotation marks, his small body radiating heat against mine through the night. "Tomorrow," Melissa had promised as she showed us to the room that first evening. "Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do. But tonight, you rest." Rest had come, mercifully, deep and dreamless. For the first time in months, I slept without starting at every sound, without the constant low-grade terror that someone would discover Jeremy in the garage, that my family would have me committed, that everything would fall apart. When I woke, weak winter sunlight was streaming through the dormer window, and Jeremy was already up, sitting cross-legged on the braided rug, examining a wooden puzzle Melissa must have left for him. His face was intent with concentration, small fingers working the pieces with surprising dexterity. "Good morning, sweetheart," I said, my voice rough with sleep. He looked up, and the smile that broke across his face was like sunrise. "Gamma, look!" He held up the puzzle, almost complete, just one piece missing. "That's wonderful," I said, marveling at his progress. Jeremy rarely spoke more than a word or two at a time, and he'd never shown much interest in toys before. The garage had been too cold, too dark for proper play. Here, in the warm safety of Melissa's apartment, he seemed to be unfurling like a plant finally given sunlight. A gentle knock on the door frame. Melissa stood there, already dressed in jeans and a flannel shirt, her silver hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. "Coffee's ready downstairs," she said, "and Mrs. Gunderson made pancakes. There's a booster seat for the little guy. I hadn't had pancakes since, I couldn't remember when. Certainly not since Henry died. Not since I'd moved in with Jessica and Richard, where breakfast was protein shakes and avocado toast, and my old-fashioned cooking was politely but firmly relegated to special occasions only, over pancakes drowning in real maple syrup. While Jeremy charmed the ladies of Willow Haven with his shy smiles and careful manners, Melissa laid out her plan. "I've been thinking about what you told me," she said, voice low enough that only I could hear. "About Rachel, about the trust fund, about Michael's journal." I nodded, glancing around to make sure no one was listening too closely. The other women seemed absorbed in fussing over Jeremy, offering him more juice, complimenting his dinosaur pajamas. "I still have contacts at the department," Melissa continued. "People who owe me favors. One in particular, Jim Redding in the Financial Crimes Unit. He's been tracking a pattern of elder exploitation cases across 3 counties. Professional people, lawyers, accountants, financial advisors, taking advantage of their older clients." My mouth went dry. "You think Rachel?" "I think it's worth a conversation with Jim," she said carefully. "Bring the journal. Bring the tape recording. Let him hear what you heard. Read what Michael wrote." Fear coiled in my stomach, cold and familiar. "But if I go to the police, they'll take Jeremy away. They'll say I kidnapped him." Melissa's eyes, that clear, steady blue, held mine. "Not if we do this right. Not if we can prove there was a reason you had to hide him." Later that afternoon, with Jeremy safely ensconced in Willow Haven's communal living room, surrounded by grandmotherly figures teaching him to play Go Fish, Melissa drove me to the Brown County Justice Center in her ancient Ford pickup. The truck's heater struggled against the February chill, and I clutched my purse containing Michael's journal and the cassette tape to my chest like a shield. "Are you sure about this?" I asked as we pulled into the parking lot, the massive brick building looming before us like a fortress. "No," Melissa answered honestly, "but I'm sure about one thing. You can't run forever, Helen. And that boy deserves more than a life in hiding." Detective James Redding was nothing like I expected. I'd imagined someone like the detectives on television, young, sharp-suited, intense. Instead, he was a man in his late 50s with salt and pepper hair, reading glasses perched on a nose that had clearly been broken more than once, and a cardigan sweater under his sport coat. His office was cluttered but orderly, with family photos on the desk and filing cabinets overflowing with folders. He greeted Melissa with a warm handshake and a warmer smile, then turned that same gentle attention to me. "Mrs. Wilson," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Melissa tells me you've had quite an ordeal." I hesitated, still clutching my purse. "If I tell you everything, what happens to Jeremy? What happens to me?" He didn't offer false reassurances, didn't tell me everything would be fine. Instead, he said, "That depends on what you tell me and what evidence you have." So I told him everything, from Michael's death to Lucia's appearance at the funeral, from finding Jeremy alone in that apartment to hiding him in my garage, from the text message warning to our flight through the snow. I showed him the journal, let him listen to the tape, watched his expression grow more grave with each revelation. When I finished, the office was silent, except for the soft whir of the heating vent above us. Detective Redding removed his glasses, polished them methodically with a handkerchief, then replaced them with careful precision. "Mrs. Wilson," he said finally, "what you've described, if it can be verified, goes beyond a family disagreement over inheritance. If your niece Rachel deliberately concealed the existence of a legal heir, if she conspired to deny your grandson his birthright, that's criminal fraud." Hope fluttered weakly in my chest. "You believe me?" "I believe you believe what you're telling me," he said carefully. "And I believe there's enough here to warrant an investigation. But," he held up a hand when I started to speak, "this is complicated by the fact that you took a child without legal custody and hid him for months. Even with extenuating circumstances, that's a serious matter." My heart sank. "So I'll go to jail, and Jeremy will go into foster care." "Not necessarily." He tapped a finger thoughtfully on Michael's journal. "What I need is corroboration, independent verification of what's in these pages, and I need to find Lucia." "But she disappeared," I protested. "I looked everywhere." "With all due respect, Mrs. Wilson, you're one woman with limited resources. My department has considerably more." He leaned forward. "Give me a week. Don't leave town, but stay at Willow Haven. It's as good a place as any to keep a low profile. Let me see what I can piece together." As Melissa drove me back to the shelter, snow began to fall again, fat, lazy flakes drifting past the truck's headlights like feathers. "What do you think?" I asked her, feeling hollowed out from the emotional toll of reliving everything for Detective Redding. "I think Jim's a good cop," she said simply, "and I think you did the right thing." That night, as Jeremy slept beside me, his small hand curled trustingly in mine, I wasn't so sure. I'd gambled everything on the word of a detective I'd just met, on the strength of evidence that might not be enough, on the hope that somewhere out there, Lucia was still alive and could be found. If I'd made the wrong choice, I might lose Jeremy forever. The thought was unbearable. Meanwhile, Mildred called every night. Jeremy was getting sicker. His cough was worsening. He missed me. He called for me softly, even though he could barely speak properly. I slept with his recording in my ear. I cried every night. Deep down, something was eating at me. I had hidden him. I had made mistakes too, out of fear, out of cowardice, out of too much love. But now I needed to do things differently, and soon. The police went after Rachel, and she fell apart. She confessed everything, the scheme, the lies, the manipulation of documents. But she tried to blame me, saying that a crazy old woman hiding a child in a garage was easier to condemn. I was about to be indicted. The week that Detective Redding asked for stretched into 2. February bled into March, and the snow began to melt, revealing patches of muddy ground beneath. Jeremy blossomed at Willow Haven, surrounded by surrogate grandmothers who spoiled him with homemade cookies and hand-knitted sweaters. His vocabulary expanded daily. Not just single words now, but phrases, sentences. His fever didn't return. His nightmares grew less frequent. I tried to take comfort in these small mercies, but anxiety gnawed at me constantly. Every phone call, every knock at the door sent my heart racing. Every police car that passed made me duck instinctively, as if they could somehow see through walls and recognize the fugitive grandmother inside. Melissa assured me that Detective Redding was making progress, that wheels were turning behind the scenes, that I needed to be patient. But patience has never been my virtue, especially not when my grandson's future hung in the balance. On the 15th day since our meeting with Redding, the call finally came. Not to me, but to Melissa. I was helping Jeremy build a fort out of sofa cushions in the communal living room when she appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Helen," she said quietly, "Jim wants to see us. Today. Now." The drive to the Justice Center felt different this time. The sky was clear, the temperature almost mild by Wisconsin standards. Crocuses were pushing up through the melting snow in front of the courthouse. Small purple sentinels announcing that winter, like all difficult seasons, eventually ends. But the knot in my stomach was tighter than ever. Melissa hadn't been able, or willing, to tell me what Redding had discovered. She just kept saying, "Better you hear it from him directly." The detective looked more tired than the last time we'd met. The circles under his eyes were darker, the lines around his mouth deeper. He wasn't alone in his office this time. A younger woman sat in the corner, dressed in a severe charcoal suit, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. She didn't smile when we entered. "Mrs. Wilson," Redding said, rising to shake my hand. "This is Assistant District Attorney Elena Vasquez. She's been consulting on your case." A prosecutor. My mouth went dry. Was this it then? Was this where they arrested me? "Please sit down," Redding continued, gesturing to the chairs across from his desk. "We have a lot to discuss." I sank into the chair, my legs suddenly weak. Melissa sat beside me, her solid presence the only thing keeping me from fleeing the room. "We found Lucia," Redding said without preamble. The world tilted. "Alive?" I whispered. He nodded. "Alive. In protective custody in Minnesota under an assumed name. She's been there for almost a year. But why? Why would she leave Jeremy? Why wouldn't she take him with her?" The questions burst from me, raw with the pain of months wondering, worrying. "Because she believed he was safer with you," Redding said gently, "and because she was running for her life." What followed was a story so twisted, so unbelievable, that if I hadn't lived through part of it myself, I would have thought it was a plot from one of those crime shows Jessica loved to watch. Rachel, my niece, my brother's daughter, the family lawyer everyone trusted, had been systematically defrauding elderly clients for years, not just managing their estates creatively or charging excessive fees, but actively stealing from them, altering wills, misdirecting funds, creating shell companies that existed only on paper. And my son had discovered it. Michael was working on a construction project at the home of one of Rachel's clients, Redding explained, flipping through a thick folder. An elderly widow named Margaret Keller. Mrs. Keller mentioned something about her investments with Rachel that didn't sound right to Michael. He started asking questions. Then he started looking into other clients. "The journal," I murmured. "Yes." Redding tapped the familiar leather-bound book on his desk. "What you gave us was just the tip of the iceberg. Michael kept more detailed records elsewhere. Records that Lucia had access to after his death. Records that made her a target." I thought of the note I'd found in Lucia's apartment. "They found us. I have to run. Please keep him safe. They'll hurt him to keep their secret." "They," I said slowly. "Not just Rachel." Redding nodded. "Rachel was the mastermind, but she had help. Your son-in-law Richard handled some of the financial transfers through his insurance business. And there were others. A notary who falsified signatures, a banker who looked the other way. The room seemed to be spinning. Richard, my daughter's husband, the man who carved the turkey at Thanksgiving and coached Tommy's Little League team. But why? They're not poor. Jessica and Richard have the lake house, the new cars. Appearances can be deceiving. The prosecutor, Vasquez, spoke for the first time. Mr. Brennan had gambling debts, significant ones, and a girlfriend in Chicago who expected to be kept in a certain lifestyle. I pressed a hand to my mouth, feeling sick. All those weekends, Richard was supposedly at business conferences. All those late-night phone calls he took in the garage. Jessica didn't know. She couldn't have known, could she? As if reading my thoughts, Redding said gently, "We don't believe your daughter was involved, Mrs. Wilson. All evidence suggests she was as much in the dark as you were. More even, since you at least suspected something wasn't right. Small comfort. What would this do to Jessica when it all came out? How would she survive the public humiliation, the loss of her husband, the knowledge that her comfortable life had been built on stolen money? And Michael's accident?" I forced myself to ask the question I'd been dreading. Was it really an accident? A heavy silence filled the office. Finally, Redding said, "We've reopened the investigation. The original report noted some inconsistencies, but nothing conclusive. Now, with context, we're looking more closely at the truck driver, at the vehicle inspection records. I can't say more than that right now." I nodded, numb, then remembering the reason for all this. "And Jeremy? What happens to him now?" That said Vasquez, leaning forward, "is why we asked you to come in today. Rachel has been arrested. She's facing multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. She's looking at significant prison time, and in an effort to mitigate her sentence, she's talking a lot, including," Redding added, "confessing to filing a false police report about you kidnapping Jeremy. She's admitted that she knew all along that Jeremy was Michael's son, that she deliberately concealed his existence to prevent him from inheriting, and that she called the police on you that night not out of concern for Jeremy's welfare, but to eliminate a threat to her scheme." Hope, dangerous and fragile, flickered in my chest. "So I'm not going to be arrested?" "No, Mrs. Wilson, you're not going to be arrested." Vasquez's severe expression softened slightly. "In fact, the department owes you an apology. You were placed in an impossible position, and you made the best choice you could to protect a child." Tears sprang to my eyes, hot and sudden. After months of fear, of second-guessing myself, of wondering if I'd done the right thing or just made everything worse, vindication felt almost too overwhelming to bear. "And Jeremy?" I asked again, voice thick with emotion. "What about Jeremy?" "His mother wants to see him," Redding said. "She'll be here tomorrow with protective escorts. After that, well, that's for the two of you to work out. Legally, she has custody, but she understands the bond you've formed with him. She's grateful to you for keeping him safe." I nodded, tears flowing freely now. Tomorrow I might lose him all over again, but at least it would be to his mother, not to the foster care system. At least he would be loved. "There's one more thing," Redding said, hesitating slightly. "The warning text, the one that told you to get out before the police arrived. We found out who sent it." I looked up, surprised. In all the chaos, I'd almost forgotten about the mysterious message that had started everything. "It was Mildred," he said, "your neighbor. She overheard Rachel on the phone with the police, making the false report. She didn't have time to explain everything, so she just sent the warning. Faithful Mildred. Even from a distance, still watching out for us." As Melissa drove me back to Willow Haven, my mind raced with all I'd learned, all that had changed in a single afternoon. Rachel's betrayal, Richard's secret life, the possibility that Michael's death wasn't an accident. And tomorrow, Lucia would return, and Jeremy would have his mother back. It was justice. It was right. So why did my heart feel so heavy at the thought of saying goodbye to the little boy who had become my world? I became his legal guardian 6 months later, and every night, when Jeremy falls asleep with his head in my lap, I think about the noisy dinners at my old house where everyone talked, but nobody listened to me. The morning Lucia was scheduled to arrive dawned clear and bright, the kind of early spring day that feels like a gift after the long Wisconsin winter. I hadn't slept. How could I? After months of protecting Jeremy, of being his whole world, I was about to hand him back to a mother he probably barely remembered. My heart felt like it was being torn in two. Joy that he would have his mother back, that Lucia was alive and safe, warring with the selfish grief of knowing I might lose him. Jeremy sensed my anxiety. Children always do, no matter how hard we try to hide our feelings from them. He was quieter than usual at breakfast, picking at his oatmeal, his eyes constantly finding mine across the table, as if to reassure himself I was still there. "Are you excited about today, sweetheart?" I asked him, trying to keep my voice light and cheerful. "You're going to meet someone very special." He just looked at me with those solemn eyes, Michael's eyes, and asked, "Gamma-stay?" My throat tightened painfully. "Of course," I managed. "Grandma's not going anywhere." But even as I said it, I wondered if it was a promise I could keep. What if Lucia wanted to take him away, start fresh somewhere else? What if she resented me for not doing more, for hiding Jeremy in a garage instead of going to the police immediately? What if she blamed me for Michael's death, for not seeing what was happening in my own family? Melissa found me in the small bedroom we shared, trying on and discarding different outfits. The floral blouse was too casual. The gray dress too funeral. The blue sweater had a stain I hadn't noticed before. "Helen," she said gently, "you look fine. And Lucia isn't coming to judge your fashion sense. I sank onto the bed, suddenly exhausted. I'm terrified, I admitted. What if she hates me? What if Jeremy chooses her and forgets all about me? What if... Stop, Melissa interrupted, sitting beside me. This isn't a competition. You both love that little boy. You both want what's best for him. Start from there. I nodded, trying to believe her, trying to quiet the voice of insecurity that had been my constant companion since Henry died, that had only grown louder when I moved in with Jessica and Richard and found myself increasingly sidelined in my own life. The old lady whose opinions didn't matter, the burden to be tolerated, not listened to. It's time, Melissa said, glancing at her watch. Detective Redding just called. They're on their way. The meeting was arranged in a small conference room at the Justice Center, neutral territory. Jeremy held my hand tightly as we walked in, half hiding behind my skirt. Detective Redding was already there, along with ADA Vasquez and a woman I didn't recognize, probably from Child Protective Services. And then the door opened, and there she was. Lucia looked both exactly as I remembered and completely different. The same dark curls, the same delicate features that Jeremy had inherited along with Michael's eyes. But she was thinner now, with shadows under her eyes and a wariness in her expression that hadn't been there before. She'd been through hell, this young woman, and she'd survived. Our eyes met across the room, and for a moment everything else fell away. Then her gaze dropped to Jeremy, half hidden behind me, and her hand flew to her mouth. "Jeremy," she whispered, voice breaking. "Mi vida." Mi corazón. Jeremy peeked out, confused, uncertain. He didn't recognize her. How could he? He'd been barely a year old when she disappeared. My heart broke for both of them. I knelt down to Jeremy's level, turning him gently to face Lucia. "Sweetheart, this is your mommy. Remember how I told you about your mommy? How she had to go away for a while to keep you safe? She's back now. She's come back for you." Jeremy looked from me to Lucia and back again, his little face scrunched in concentration. Lucia knelt too, a few feet away, not rushing forward, giving him space, the restraint clearly costing her everything. "Hi, Jeremy," she said softly. "You've gotten so big. Do you remember your elephant? The gray one with the pink ears? You used to sleep with him every night." Something flickered in Jeremy's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or the stirring of a memory too deep for his conscious mind to grasp. He took one hesitant step away from me, then another. Lucia opened her arms, and after one more moment of hesitation, Jeremy walked into them. I turned away, unable to watch, tears streaming down my face. This was right. This was how it should be. A child belongs with his mother. I'd done my job, kept him safe until she could return. I should be happy. I was happy, but the grief was just as real. A gentle hand on my shoulder. Detective Redding, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "You did good, Mrs. Wilson," he said quietly, above and beyond. I nodded, unable to speak, and let him lead me to a chair. Lucia and Jeremy were still embracing, both crying now. Years of separation distilled into one moment of reconnection. It was beautiful. It was heartbreaking. When they finally separated, Lucia looked up at me, her face wet with tears. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for loving him when I couldn't be there, for keeping him safe. Michael always said you were the strongest one in the family. He was right." That nearly undid me again. Michael had said that? My wild, independent son, who argued with me about everything from politics to pizza toppings. He'd thought I was strong. What followed was a conversation I'll never forget. The three of us, plus the various officials, planning Jeremy's future. Not the future I'd feared, where Lucia would take him and disappear again, but something I hadn't dared to hope for. "I have a small apartment in the protective housing program," Lucia explained. "It's not much, but it's safe. Jeremy will have his own room." She hesitated, looking at me intently. "And I was hoping there's a spare bedroom. If you wanted, he's used to you now. It would be good for him to have consistency." I stared at her, not comprehending at first. "You want me to visit?" She shook her head. "I want you to live with us, to help me raise him. He needs his grandmother, and Her voice broke slightly. I could use a mother figure too, if you're willing. 6 months later, it became official. The judge signed the joint custody papers, making me Jeremy's legal co-guardian alongside Lucia. By then, we'd moved out of protective housing into a small but cheerful house in Madison, far enough from Appleton to be safe, close enough that Melissa could visit regularly. Rachel was sentenced to 15 years for fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. Richard took a plea deal and got 8 years. Jessica filed for divorce immediately and moved to Chicago to be near her college roommate. She sends birthday cards to Jeremy, but has never asked to visit. Some wounds are too deep, I suppose. Some betrayals too fundamental to recover from. As for Michael's accident, the investigation continues. The truck driver disappeared shortly after Rachel's arrest. The brake lines on the truck showed signs of tampering. But without the driver's testimony, without direct evidence linking Rachel or Richard to the scene, it remains officially unsolved. Sometimes I still wake in the night, cold with the memory of that garage, of Jeremy huddled in the dark, of all the ways my silence nearly cost us everything. But then I hear him laughing with Lucia in the kitchen, or feel his small hand slip into mine as we walk to the park, and I know we made it through the darkness into light. Every evening, Jeremy asks for the same bedtime ritual, a story from before, as he calls it, a story about his daddy. So I tell him about Michael's first bicycle, about how he always defended the smaller kids at school, about how he could fix anything with duct tape and determination. I show him photos and home movies. I keep his father alive in his memory. And every night, when Jeremy falls asleep with his head in my lap, I think about those noisy family dinners in my old house, where everyone talked but nobody listened to me, where appearances mattered more than truth, where money mattered more than love. I don't miss it, not any of it. Sometimes we receive anonymous letters asking for forgiveness. I burn each one by one, watching the paper curl and blacken in the fireplace. Some sins can't be forgiven with words alone. Today, Jeremy attends a special school for children with trauma. He loves painting, great splashes of color that express what his still limited vocabulary cannot. And every time I see one of his artworks, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't read that message at that dinner. Maybe the police would have taken me away. Maybe I would have been forgotten like so many other old women who become inconvenient. But I obeyed, and in doing so, I discovered who I truly was. Not just a grandmother, not just a widow, not just an old woman whose opinions could be dismissed, but a fighter, a protector, someone who would break rules and risk everything for love. That's who I am. That's who I've always been. It just took a text message, a terrified little boy, and the courage to run into the unknown to help me remember. And now, watching Jeremy and Lucia plant flowers in our small garden, hearing their laughter mingle in the spring air, I know with absolute certainty that it was all worth it. Every moment of fear, every sleepless night, every painful truth uncovered. Because this is what family should be. Not blood, not obligation, not appearances, just love. Fierce, protective, uncompromising love. The kind of love worth running for. Sometimes the most important decisions in our lives come disguised as text messages from unknown numbers, as whispers in the dark, as moments when we must choose between safety and truth. I often wonder what would have happened if I had ignored that message, if I had stayed at that dinner table, pretending everything was normal while my grandson shivered alone in that cold garage. Would you have had the courage to walk away from everything you knew? To become a fugitive at 67? To stand against your own flesh and blood for what was right? The hardest lesson I learned through all of this wasn't about betrayal. It was about courage. The courage to listen to that small voice inside that says, "This isn't right," even when everyone around you insists otherwise. Family isn't always defined by blood or legal documents. Sometimes family is created in the most unlikely circumstances, in midnight escapes, in strangers who become allies, in the fierce protection of those who cannot protect themselves. Sometimes we must lose everything we thought mattered to discover what truly does. If my story touched your heart or made you think about the silent battles others might be fighting, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Life rarely gives us perfect choices, only the chance to be brave when it matters most. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that will challenge you to ask, what would I do if pushed to my limits? What secrets would I keep or reveal for love? Thank you for listening to an old woman's tale of betrayal, courage, and the unexpected journey back to herself.